but here we are. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. This is Beetlejuice Beetlejuice. So right now over on Critic List, as you all can see, 31 voters over there. And again, the very committed community over here, a very passionate movie-loving community over here on Critic List. And so I trust this group more so than any other, especially when we look at films that have a lot of ratings. And so with 31 votes, it's at a 57% decent score. And honestly, I think that that is a very, very fair assessment. In fact, it's not too far off from where my score of the film was. So my score of the film was a 4.5 or 45% out of 100. Decent score. So over on Critic List, there are various ratings. You have the lowest being a heinous, then you have the bogus rating, then you have the decent rating. From there, you go to rad and most excellent. This film is absolutely, right, in every single way, a decent movie. There are moments that are funny. There are moments that are not that funny. There are moments that go on way too long. There are moments that aren't long enough. And I think that that's kind of the story of this movie. It is a movie that I think hardcore fans will either love or they will hate. For me, going in with high expectations, being a fan of that original film, I was expecting a lot. I don't feel like I got what I was expecting. And I don't feel like I got the sequel that, honestly, this property deserved to get. What we did get, though, in spades, what I thought at least, was the performance given by Michael Keaton. Michael Keaton steals the show in every single scene he is in, just like he should. And unfortunately, he's just not in the film enough. Though I will grant anyone out there who's probably trying to type away saying, yes, but he wasn't in the original film all that much either, that is true. But now that we live in a time that we are, where we have the sequel to a film that came out decades ago coming out, and the biggest selling point you have is Michael Keaton as Beetlejuice, you would think that maybe the formula could change a little bit to have that role be a little bit more prominent. In fact, I honestly would have loved a film where it's him as the actual main character and the human characters are more of a side quest. I think that that actually probably would have been a better use of the time. And it also could have potentially led to this movie being a very special thing, right? Being enough like the original as far as it's having those same characters and it being a continuation of some of the elements of those stories, picking up in certain ways with all these different years later, but also shifting its focus enough to feel like a breath of fresh air. Instead, I feel ultimately like we get a pretty rotten story, all right, just from an objective level. Let me go ahead and get into my actual review here that I posted over on Critic List back last Thursday when I saw the film. So we have here right here. So just getting back out of the theater after seeing the long-awaited sequel to the classic Tim Burton original film, and I have to say that I'm pretty disappointed. After months of marketing effectively building up the hype for this movie that actually had me excited, which is quite rare for a modern Hollywood film to accomplish, the execution sadly leaves quite a bit to be desired. And I had very high expectations on this movie. I think that's also a big reason why I have a lot of critical thoughts on it and why that fall for this movie was a lot higher. If you go in with middling to low expectations, I think you are more likely to like it. It's not a guarantee ever, right? But in general, I think that might be the case. Whereas if you go in with high expectations, I think there's a much stronger chance that you dislike the film than you like the film. The way I like to think of it in this way is that I think more people are like me, where they're middle of the road. And then from there, the next biggest group are people that dislike it. And then the next biggest group are those that like it, right? So there's a few people who love it. There are a lot more people who hate it, but I think the most amount of people out there are in this middle ground territory. And again, that's just based on some of the general assessments that I have seen on the film. So starting off with the positives going on with the review. The biggest and most obvious is the solid performance given by Michael Keaton. Though the first time you see him on screen, you can clearly see his age through the makeup, it doesn't take long for him to make you forget as he seamlessly falls back into the role as if he hasn't missed a beat over the last few decades. His performance is complemented by a few other solid actors, including Jenna Ortega, who very naturally fits into this world. There are also some fun supporting characters that are a welcome sight and a good reminder of the fact that this is a Tim Burton production. And the film has recently come out. I won't go into spoilers as far as some of the cameos and really special supporting characters, I guess you could say, because a cameo is like you're in and you're out. There's like one at least that I think he's in there enough to get people excited. I could tell it was him just from the back of his head, and that alone kind of had me excited. But I think it is true, right? Michael Keaton, he is the reason to see this movie. He is the reason this film has any positive reaction to it whatsoever. And I think Jenna Ortega is really the only other supporting actor that's not one of the originals I obviously think Catherine O'Hara does a phenomenal job in this movie. I don't think, unfortunately, that the same can be said for Winona Ryder, but I think as far as the new characters that are brought in, Jenna Ortega definitely steals the show in those scenes. And what I like about it is that though she is, of course, the daughter of Lydia, right? She is a part of this family. She is also one who's trying to break away from her mother. And it's interesting, right? Because that dynamic that existed in the first movie, right, between Lydia's character and her stepmother, right, just obviously clearly having this separation there, also exists here. Only now it's Lydia who is the dark, obscure one that the daughter wants to have nothing to do with, and so therefore she is still unique and still different. Only instead of it being into ghosts and being into the occult, she is into things like climate change activism. And yes, unfortunately, that is a part of her character. What I love about the character of Astrid, though, is that though that is there, it is more of a backdrop, right? There's no speeches. There's no preaching really in the film either. It's more of, you see a bunch of posters that she's putting up. You see it in her room at the school that she's at, right? You see the different posters and different things that are there. There are a couple of moments as far as her relationship with her father and how that was kind of where her activism kind of got born. But what I like about the film is that, and this is where I think the writing actually is a bit clever, is they do try to, I think, handle it in a way where in some fashions it actually kind of makes fun of a lot of this more, most films today would more try to push ideology, woke messaging, but this one instead kind of plays with it a bit, right? Kind of makes fun of it a little bit. And there's a couple of moments, not just with that, but with other things where that actually happens. And I thought that was actually pretty good. But as far as acting goes, that's, I think, the best part of the film is, Jenna Ortega's for supporting role and Michael Keaton in the film. The other thing that the film did right was music in both the fun and nostalgic Danny Elfman score and the fun song choices that were added throughout as well. Other than the scenes with Keaton, my favorite may have actually been the opening credits, just to be able to listen to the classic score on the big screen once again. So there's this phenomenal sequence that's a telenovela sequence that is fantastic. There's a song at the end of the movie, but I will say, and I get into this further into the review, that the lyrics of those song was funnier than the actual moment itself. I think that they chose the perfect song for that then, right? Because it definitely added to the comedic elements of it and had me laughing quite a bit. But it also does speak to relying on things that you really shouldn't be relying on in a movie like this. But the Danny Elfman score is phenomenal. The opening sequence to me was my favorite part, other than Keaton, because I got to sit there in the big screen. I was in the IMAX showing, and just to hear that Danny Elfman score, I love the Beetlejuice score so much. I grew up actually watching the cartoon, so even though I have, of course, seen the original film, most of my knowledge of Beetlejuice comes rather from the animated cartoon they did, and watching so many episodes of that show. And the score being used, of course, in the original film, it's just a darn good time. Like, that alone, to me, makes it worth at least staying for the very beginning of the film, if not for anything else. And his score definitely does persist throughout the entirety of the movie as well. Sadly, however, this is where the positives end for me. Though the story is mostly inoffensive and doesn't damage the original, and again, in many ways actually makes fun of certain things in today's society, the fact remains that it takes way too many left turns and becomes a bit of a giant cluster. It honestly felt like the writers were trying to pay homage to the original, but also did not want the film to just be a beat-for-beat sequel like we have seen with so many other films try and fail to do. What the audience gets instead, however, is a messy and bloated plot that features way too many subplots that are a waste of time. The film's story could have benefited from being a bit more generic, or at least being in more capable hands to leave the audience wanting more. Instead, we get a movie that I am sure many will like, but almost no one will love, which means that people are going to be better served by rewatching the original and leaving this film to collect dust on the shelf. And I still very much hold to that. The people coming out saying they like the film, I have to ask the question, are you going to buy this film on Blu-ray? And do you think that you would actually watch it as much as the original? I think most people, not everybody, but most people, if they were being honest, would say, no, they probably won't buy it on Blu-ray. They probably won't buy it on physical media. And even if they maybe do, or maybe even if they try to watch it later on streaming, they're not going to watch it as many times as the original. It doesn't have the same staying power. It doesn't have the same just special quality that the original film ultimately has. If you love Michael Keaton and want to see him do his thing, you may enjoy this film. It must be said, though, that his screen time is so limited in the film up until the end. This is very well may have been the case with the original film too, but since most people are seeing it for him, it would have been better to let the story focus more on him than the plethora of other characters they waste time with instead. This is a wait for streaming movie for me, for most, I would say. And yeah, definitely hold to my initial thoughts, my initial review. Typical PG-13 language, unfortunately some blasphemy, as you all know. Don't like that. Story about death. Some of the more graphic elements are played in a more cartoonish, practical fashion, which I thought were good. There is no nudity or sexual stuff in there, so it's mostly implied, if anything. Political bias, I say slightly left, only because it does feature Astra Dietz, who's Lydia's daughter, and her father being environmentalist. However, the film plays several things about it for laughs without actually mocking it, so it's quite honestly fair to both sides, but it is still there. Not for kids, older teens maybe, and to be honest, it isn't that funny. So for entertainment value, I only put a bit here, right? Because there's a few things that the audience I thought that I saw it with enjoyed, and I laughed at a few parts as well, but a lot was left to be desired. So yeah, overall, 45% decent score for me. General audiences seem to have a very similar viewpoint, 57% decent, according to the users over on Beetlejuice Beetlejuice. And on critic list, and as you can see, right, we have pretty much scores all over the place. You have a bogus score, decent, a most excellent from Mr. Banjo Sandwich Worthington, and yes, I'm one of the 3 downvotes, Banjo Sandwich. It was me, Banjo Sandwich. It was me all along. You have Lexi giving a decent, DK Movie Lover giving a decent. You have the Bast in Black giving it 80% solid score. You have Orange Chat giving it an 80% most excellent. I was not one of the downvotes until now. Ooh. Actually, I was a positive. I was a like. I'll give you a like. Actually, no, I'm gonna take the like away. I'm gonna cancel out Orange Chat. Patooey, I spit at you. I'm kidding. You're wonderful. The main point of this, though, is to show you that, again, there is a lot of mixed reactions, mixed thoughts on it. I think the bogus score is also fair. This one from Terap, 0% heinous? No, I'm sorry. No. Look, the film isn't great. It's not a heinous movie, all right? It's not complete garbage. Slipping into the void. I love you, dude, but no. I'm sorry. Heinous? Patooey, I spit at you. I spit at everybody here. Now for a huge special shout out to all of my Chosen of Valhalla members, starting off first with my people on Patreon, Father Luca Illick and Miss Martin Muses. Check out her YouTube channel by the same name, Miss Martin Muses. Also to my Subscribestar people, Matt317. Check out his Twitch channel by the same name, Matt317. And also to the K-Man. Check out his website, xtheboundaries.co. And lastly to my YouTube member, Mr. Roy. Shout out to you, good sir. And if you want your name shouted out at the end of every live stream and video, check out the top link in the video description below where you get access to that. Also, you get access to a plethora of other things. You get your name listed at the end of every live stream and video, like you saw in those names that came up before this video started. And also access to a giveaways channel that I host over on the Discord server where I give away 4Ks, Steelbooks, Blu-rays, all kinds of stuff. So check that out if you're interested in that. Also, I have an exclusive podcast that I hold at least once a month, and it's always a good time, and you get extra bonus content with that also. So if any of that sounds interesting, again, check out that top link in the video description below. You guys are all amazing, and beautiful people. Have a wonderful rest of your day, a blessed August, and as always, God bless.